This is Florida's coral reef, a living kingdom, a refuge, all of it a gift, and we are its keeper. Yet, some coral, once vibrant and colorful, now sits in hollow white. But this is not where our story ends. This is Florida's coral reef. We will protect its splendor and mystery. We will keep and preserve the gift we have received, our inheritance, our legacy.
Thank you all for who are joining us from around the world and Florida especially. This is Ocean Day, Become a Coastal Steward. The reason we're doing this is to help bring education to the world, especially those who live in Florida, about the value of protecting our reefs. Then we'll be transitioning to critical reef restoration and social action with Dalton Hesley from University of Miami and Rasmus, and also Rescue a Reef. We'll then be greeted by Dr. Derek Burkholder with an amazing overview of reef animals that you can expect to see on the reef, ranging from turtles down to fish. And then we'll be greeted by Megan Kelly, who will talk to us about Florida-friendly landscaping and gardening and how you can reduce any kind of nutrients you might have to be putting on your lawn or garden that will eventually run off to the ocean anyway. So the less you can do, the better. And she'll be giving us an idea of what we can do from that, as well as creating great food gardens that can help provide food for yourself if you need to. Melissa Sate is a South Florida native and grew up in Ocean Ridge. She received her Bachelor's of Science from Tulane University in New Orleans in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, and a Master of Science in Marine Biology from Nova Southeastern University, where she was a graduate researcher for the Coral Reef Restoration, Assessment, and Monitoring Lab. After completing her degree, Melissa worked at Miami-Dade County's Department of Environmental Resources Management, where she managed coral reef monitoring fieldwork, and then on to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Coral Reef Conservation Program as the Reef Injury Prevention and Response Technician. Melissa currently works for Coastal Eco Group, a private environmental consulting business, as a senior marine biologist. Melissa has been serving as the president of Friends of Our Florida Reefs since April 2020, and she's been a board member since 2017. She is a great friend of mine. She is wonderful at helping us keep FOPR running, and we're very happy and proud to be with her today. So Melissa, I'm going to pass it over to you for your wonderful presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Scott. Can you all see, and how do I sound?
You sound great. I could see your screen.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the introduction, Scott, and I really want to thank you for putting this together. Scott is the founder of Friends of Our Florida Reefs and past president, and he does a monumental amount of work for our organization and our reefs, so I really want to thank you for that. I'm going to give you a quick overview of Florida's coral reef, a place I've grown up with and love, and talk to you a little bit about FOFR, we call ourselves, or Friends of Our Florida Reefs. So let's dive in. We'll start with a really neat video PSA put out by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
This is Florida's coral reef, a living kingdom, a refuge, and all of it a gift. We will protect its splendor and mystery. We will keep and preserve the gift we have received, our inheritance, our legacy.
All right, our beautiful, beautiful reefs. So here is a map of our reefs. The Florida's coral reef system starts all the way down in the Dry Tortugas, in the Dry Tortugas Ecological Reserve and National Park, which is west of Key West, and it runs north all the way to the St. Lucie Inlet in Martin County. Now, south of Miami-Dade County, or in the middle of Miami-Dade County and south, you have Biscayne National Park, the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, John Pennekamp State Park, and of course the Dry Tortugas Park and Reserve. And all of these are managed by federal entities, one state entity, the John Pennekamp State Park, and they have been historically managed for many, many years. However, the reef does keep going much further north into Martin County, and that is Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Coral Reef Conservation Program's purview, is the northern 105 plus miles of our reef just north of Biscayne National Park. This reef was recently named after an initiative put forth by FOFR called the Kristen Jacobs Coral Reef Ecosystem Conservation Area, after Kristen Jacobs, a really integral representative in the state of Florida who unfortunately passed away much too young. So the reef system up here is named after her, and that's mostly what I'm going to be concentrating on, and as that is Friends of Our Florida Reefs purview area. So we are a citizen support organization. I'll talk a little bit more about us later, but we support the state's Coral Reef Conservation Program. So Florida's Coral Reef recently got rebranded. We got this fancy logo. Governor Ron DeSantis is pictured here with FDEP and other partners, launching an initiative to promote awareness and protection of our reef, along with the NFL, who their green team put together this initiative and developed a program called 100 Yards of Hope, which restored 100 yards of coral reef in honor of the Super Bowl season that was here in Miami and as well as Tampa. And it was a really neat project where veteran divers worked alongside scientists to restore 100 yards of reef offshore Miami. And a quick overview of coral reefs that I know not everybody quite knows, but corals are animals and they're related to jellyfish and anemones. They have little tiny polyps, that's kind of like the anemone part, and they all live together in a community, which we call a colony. So they're animals, but they also have a really cool relationship with microscopic plants or algae. Big word, zooxanthellae. They live in their tissues in a symbiotic relationship. So the animals benefit from the energy that the plants provide, and the plants are protected. Now these plants, the zooxanthellae, are actually what provide corals their beautiful, vibrant color. And you may have heard of coral bleaching, which is a big stressor for corals. When corals become stressed by any degree, hot, cold, light, nutrients, the zooxanthellae can expel themselves from the tissues, which causes the coral to turn white. Now, once coral bleaching initially happens, the coral is not dead. However, it can die from coral bleaching without its zooxanthellae friends. But if conditions return to normal fast enough, the coral can survive coral bleaching. So stony corals are the main reef architects, and they have a really cool superpower, I like to say, especially when I talk to kids. They can grab chemicals from the water and actually create rock or limestone, which much of South Florida, our whole foundation is on. These corals need hard substrate for their larvae to settle and grow upon. So they'll spawn and the larvae will be floating along in the ocean, and they need a good place to settle. The polyps are mainly colonial in stony corals, so they all live together in like a condo community type situation. This is the great star coral on the left and staghorn coral, Acropora cervicornis, on the right. So corals, especially the bolder corals like the great star coral, actually grow very, very slow. This is one reason we have to try and help them and avoid damage to them as much as possible. And damage to corals can also be an entry point for disease. Some species grow a little faster. Our threatened Acropora species, the elkhorn and staghorn coral, actually can grow a little bit faster. And this is a neat graphic of coral growth. So after 1 year, you might only see an inch of growth in this brain coral. But compared to a tree, they can grow, much, much faster. So it's really hard to protect corals after a big damage event because we just don't see recovery as fast as for example, a forest. This is a really neat coral that unfortunately is no longer with us. It's succumbed to a disease that the reefs have been experiencing for the last 7 years, and I'll talk more about that later. But this coral was offshore of Dania Hollywood Beach area, and I got to visit it quite a few times. But back in the early 2000s, scientists from Nova Southeastern University were able to actually put a core into it, and you can actually count the rings, almost like a tree, and age this coral. And by coring this coral, they discovered it was very, very old, over 300 years old. And you can even see different, what they think is different events in our system in these dark areas in the core on the right. Like when the Everglades was completely rerouted. We think that area is up here by 1950. So octocorals are a big part of our reefs up in the northern portion of Florida's coral reef. They're very common, much more common than hard corals, but they still provide a substantial habitat value to fish and invertebrates on the reef. And they're just beautiful to look at. So our reef here, Florida's coral reef, is very diverse. We have over 70 sponges, which are our animals as well. We have 517 fish species, over 600 invertebrates, and 43 plus stony coral species. And we have some special stony coral species. These are listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened in the state of Florida. The pillar coral, the lobestar coral, boulder coral are two acroporas, staghorn and elkhorn, mountainous star coral, and rough cactus coral. Now the pillar coral is a special one up on the upper left. That is actually considered locally extinct here, unfortunately. It's succumbed to this disease that I'll talk to you about in a bit. So our reefs are important. They provide coastal resilience. They protect our coastlines, and our coastlines in Florida are everything. So a healthy reef, would protect the coast, and you'd have a healthy mangrove community protecting our infrastructure, but a degraded reef can mess all of that up. Florida's reefs annually are estimated to provide $355 million in flood protection benefits and $320 million in economic activity. And during an extreme storm event, they are estimated to provide $1 billion in protection. So they're very, very important. They're economically essential for other reasons too, such as fishing, food, medicine, and tourism. They're estimating, this is an old study actually from 2004, so I'm assuming these numbers have gone quite higher. They're estimated to provide 71,000 jobs and generate 6.3 billion in our South Florida counties. So corals have a lot of stressors, global stressors you may have heard of: coral bleaching, ocean acidification due to the warming of our climate, and local stressors. Our reefs here in Florida are unique compared to the rest of the world. We have 8 million people basically living on top of them. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia is much further offshore, and even the coastline there is much less populated. We are the only reefs in the world with so many people on top of them. So lots of local stressors, such as bad diving practices, coastal construction, water pollution, harmful fishing practices, algal blooms, invasive species, and all of these boats here you see anchored offshore. This is the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show many years ago. They're all anchored on the reef. So that can cause a lot of damage. And all these stressors together, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. So the Coral Reef Conservation Program is of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. They manage the reefs just north of Biscayne National Park, like I said earlier. They focus on 5 key threats to our reefs: maritime industry and coastal construction impacts, lack of awareness and appreciation, land-based sources of pollution, fishing, diving, and other uses, and reef resilience. Friends of Our Florida Reefs is their citizen support organization. So they are a government agency. And so we're here to help them raise money for any gaps or help them with other gaps they might have in staffing and whatnot. We were founded in 2015 by Scott Checkman, and he was our president for a while. We are a 501c3. And our main goal is to enhance the coral reef conservation's management programs. We assist with rapid response need. We participate in reef cleanups. We conduct outreach and education. We help with their Southeast Florida Action Network and their Bleach Watch programs. So we're just here to fill in the gaps and help out. So this is just a quick list of some things you can do. Conserve water, create a Florida-friendly yard, and Megan will discuss that later. Use fertilizers appropriately, whole big list. Sunscreens, look at your sunscreen ingredients, and we're always here if you want to learn more about what you can do to help our reefs. So I'm going to get into the sad part of my talk, but it's an important part. In 2014, a disease was first observed offshore of Miami, Florida. And you'll watch this slide just keep progressing. The disease was observed in these corals. It comes about, and I'll show you some pictures next, but it spread north and south. And I don't have the latest slide, but I have seen it. Unfortunately, in 2021, this red area will be at the dry tortugas. The disease has spread along the entire reef tract. So this is what it looks like. The margins of the disease, the brown is actually living tissue, and then the white edge is the disease margin. And then that darker part in the middle, that's actually dead tissue that already has algae growing on it. And we don't know what this disease is from. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. These are some other different species that have been affected by the disease. This disease was a little unique compared to other diseases. It affected more than half of our species. And this is how fast it progresses, just extremely fast. From January to February, 1 month, more than half the coral is gone. So disease is normal in our community. Prior to this disease, we have an endemic prevalence of 2 to 3% of the corals might have a disease, such as black bland, white plague, white spot, all very kind of normal background disease. This disease can get 66 to 100% prevalence in some areas, which is very, very dramatic. But nothing like a terrible situation to bring together an amazing group of partners doing all kinds of amazing things. These are just, I'm sure there's even more, but this is a list of the partners right now. They're doing many different things. One is to search for the pathogen. I know it's been 7 years. You might say, how do you not know? But corals have a very complicated microbiome. So they have natural bacteria and viruses living within their tissues. It's just extremely difficult to parse out what's actually causing this disease. Some innovative disease interventions have been discovered, such as putting a paste with epoxy around the disease margin. They've seen some success, first tested in the lab and also in field trials, actually stopping the disease progression on these corals. Also rescuing corals. So the one on the left, that's the pillar coral that I told you was locally extinct up here in the northern portion of Florida's coral reef. We were able to rescue pieces of the tissue of these and other corals, healthy ones, to keep genetic diversity alive for years to come. And these corals are being stored all over the country in different facilities. The Georgia Aquarium, there's a rescue facility in Orlando, built by Disney and SeaWorld, Nova Southeastern University, University of Miami, all house pieces of these corals, like a Noah's Ark. And finally, coral restoration, coral propagation and community involvement through citizen science. This is a big, big hope for our future. And with this, I'm going to pass it on to Dalton Heasley of the University of Miami, and he's going to talk to you about restoring the future of our coral reefs.
Dalton Heasley is a senior research associate in Dr. Diego Lerman's Coral Restoration Lab at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science, RASMUS, where he studies the relationship between coral reefs and coastal communities. He received his Master of Professional Science degree in 2015 and Master of Science in Education degree in 2021 from the University of Miami, which focuses on citizen science and community psychology. In addition to working as a research associate, Dalton manages Rescue a Reef, the lab's citizen science program designed to advance coral reef restoration through education, outreach, and public participation.
My name is Dalton. I'm a senior research associate at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School in Dr. Diego Lerman's Coral Restoration Lab. And that's really the emphasis of our work, is trying to restore the future of our coral reefs. So as you've already heard, these are important ecosystems, some of the most diverse on our planet. And they provide a whole suite of services to us, whether it's coastal protection, habitat for reef organisms, food for over 1 billion people on this planet, and obviously stimulating our economy. And as you've heard, that provides billions in goods and services in Florida alone. So when you think about the worldwide value of corals, it's in the hundreds of billions. But as you also heard, this image right here is no longer the norm when it comes to local coral reefs. This image was taken in Biscayne National Park, but you'd have some difficulty finding a beautiful, diverse, complex reef such as this. And much more likely you'd find a reef like this, much flatter, more barren, and generally just lacking life. And this is a particular issue because coral reefs are really the building blocks of our oceans. They support so much of ocean life that if we lose them, we fear it will create a domino effect that could ripple to not only ocean communities, but coastal communities as well. So what is the current state of our reefs? Well, we've already experienced massive losses of keystone coral species to the point that 7 are now listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, with a third of coral species around the world at risk of extinction, like the dinosaurs, and 75% of our reefs being highly threatened, experiencing almost annual decline. But the good news, as you've heard, is that coral scientists can actually work to recover these degraded coral populations. And so what specifically are we doing at the University of Miami on that front? Well, it's called coral reef restoration or coral gardening. So I imagine a few of you have now heard of coral restoration before, or coral gardening, but I still want to at least cover what that means and what we're doing with it. And it's fairly straightforward, where there's really only 4 steps to coral gardening and restoration, with the first being to collect small pieces of coral from the wild. These are called parent or donor corals, and they really create your stock for your gardening. So then once you have those initial corals of different species and different genotypes, you then work to grow them or farm them. I like to think of ourselves as underwater farmers. And the great news is that over time, as they grow, you can then propagate them or prune them, which are fancy words for fragmenting. And you can do it in such a manner to actually increase their growth as a result, which allows you to scale up. And then once you've scaled up and have this sustainable stock of corals in your nursery, you then transplant them back to local reefs. And that's really the 4-step process that has allowed individuals all over the world to start promoting coral recovery as we see these active declines, to the point that now around the world, tens of thousands of corals are outplanted every single year. And you couldn't say this even 5 years ago today. So what does this look like for those that are unfamiliar? Well, if we look at step 2, growing them in an underwater nursery, here's a side-by-side image of staghorn coral, a threatened coral species, a branching coral, being grown in a nursery, where the initial small donor fragments are placed on pedestals or platforms. And then you can see 1 year later, there's tons of new growth. So then at that point, you can fragment from that new growth to populate other parts of the nursery and accelerate that growth through that pruning process by creating more trees, more framework to expand your nursery. Finally, then transplanting back onto the local reef. So you can see the image on the left is a small piece of staghorn coral that was attached to the reef with nail and cable tie with a little bit of epoxy. And then a year later, you can see it's a healthy, large, mature coral colony that's not only contributing to the reef structure, but it's potentially helping seed the surrounding area through reproduction. Then again, if you think about this single coral and consider tens of thousands of these being transplanted, you can imagine that we're able to actually build back reef structure and framework. And that's the ultimate goal. So to really bring this to life for people that the process might be new to, here are, albeit a grainy photo of some small, about index finger size pieces of staghorn coral. And then 8 months later, you can see they start to blossom or form new branches. We then went in and fragmented off the top of that coral. And then 8 months later, you can see there's more growth. So again, that's that pruning vigor, that accelerated growth that's allowed us to scale up, so that over the past decade, we've been able to turn hundreds of fragments into thousands, with tens of thousands planted on the reef. And you can grow these corals in all sorts of different structures, lines and blocks, frames, tables, but in particular, the coral tree in the top right is one of the most common structures used. But those resources aren't necessarily accessible to other areas of the world. So it's been really important that the techniques used for coral gardening have been simple, low tech, that are easily accessible. So less developed areas that are experiencing these issues equally, if not more than South Florida, are also able to utilize the process. Here's a small snapshot of specifically Miami-Dade County, where our University of Miami Rodenstiel School is working. So you can see, dating back to 2019, we have 3 different coral nurseries. We've established over 100 different reef restoration sites that we're actively monitoring, now planted 25,000 plus corals. But we're just one piece of a puzzle, a network of restoration researchers and practitioners that are continually restoring Florida's coral reef, as well as throughout the Caribbean and elsewhere. And then I want to talk about some of our success. What have we seen to date in terms of active reef restoration? Well, first and foremost, we wanted to establish that they're surviving, that the corals we're planting are living to maturity. And a Caribbean-wide study showed that over 85% of all out plants are surviving over a year in advance, which means that they're viable parts of the reef. We're always incorporating new species as well, because we can no longer just focus on threatened coral species. We need to think about ecosystem restoration. So that means starting to work with both star corals, brain corals, thinking about other marine organisms like urchins and diadema, so that we're working at the ecosystem level rather than just the species level. We're also looking at stress hardening corals to make them more resilient, because they obviously are experiencing a suite of stressors, whether it's disease, intensifying storms, increasing ocean temperatures. And so we're able to now use coral gardening as a vehicle for research to try and toughen our corals up. So this image here is actually showing corals that we deliberately bleached in a controlled lab environment and then planted back onto a local reef, where they were able to recover with a portion now being more resilient and resistant to bleaching because of it. We've also seen spawning, successful spawning of both our nursery corals and our restored corals, which was a huge breakthrough. So here's the image or the video showing these corals actually reproducing, and they can produce viable offspring, which is really exciting news. It means that these reefs that we're restoring are potentially seeding the surrounding area and promoting that natural recovery that we're working towards. And in the past 5 years, we made great advancements on a number of different fronts, which has prompted the launching of the Coral Reef Restoration Hub, which is bringing together some of the best and brightest in coral research and restoration to work collectively, so that at each restoration site, we're not just using one tool or another, we're using all of them. So now I want to talk about the future, though. It will obviously be determined by the organism, the coral, the ocean atmospheric response, but perhaps most importantly is the societal response, us. What are we going to do with this information to ensure coral reefs don't disappear in our lifetime? And what our lab is doing on that front is citizen science, which aims to educate and engage the public in our coral research and restoration. And so we've named that program Rescue a Reef, that's designed to build both community and coastal resilience through our research, restoration, and citizen science activities. And that goal is to host expeditions where the general public can come offshore with us and help with our restoration in hopes of better bridging the gap we see between science and society. So what does that look like? What are citizen science coral restoration expeditions composed of? Well, like I said, they're immersive, they're offshore underwater. So it starts with a short training session in the morning where these divers and snorkelers hear a little bit more about our restoration techniques. They get a little hands-on experience before they're underwater working alongside of us. So at the coral nursery, they help clean our coral trees, they help take measurements, and then actually harvest the corals that we'll be transplanting that day. Then the second part of the expedition is outplanting. So our team prioritizes the use of a coral-friendly cement. So we'll mix a batch of cement, we'll load them into piping bags for icing on a cake, and then we'll work to fix these corals to the reef to increase that bare substrate. And we've had immense success. That image on the right you can see is of a newly outplanted cluster of staghorn corals. And then just 5 months later, you can see there's a lot of new coral cover. And so citizen scientists have been a huge help to our restoration efforts, which isn't even considering the educational component. But to date, our citizen scientists on these public expeditions have established 15 plus new restoration sites. We've had hundreds of people come on a significant number of expeditions, and those individuals have actually outplanted another 7,000 plus corals in Miami-Dade County. But again, this is just part of a network of restoration efforts. So I will return to that somewhat bleak image I had showed you earlier of that degraded reef, but that's actually a restoration site. And so our citizen scientists work to restore that site to what you see in front of you that can hopefully promote that natural recovery long term. So I wanted to at least pivot and talk about what you, the audience members, can also do to support Florida's coral reef in its restoration. Well, the first is to do something. You've already heard a long list of onshore activities that are available to you. And I would encourage you to start somewhere because it really is important to have societal support. The next is to consider donating. Our organizations are very small, but we're trying to have big impact. So every dollar really counts. Then the last thing I would encourage is to dive in to either our rescue program or another citizen science project. You already heard about CFAN, which is an amazing organization. Reef is another marine science one, but there's tons of citizen science projects in your area that could use your help. And a great resource for finding those projects are listed here, with SciStarter being my favorite. So you can look up something like hummingbirds or stars, and it will have citizen science projects that are available for you to support. If you wanted to hear more about these ongoing efforts and what the future looks like, as you heard from Melissa, there was this 100 Yards of Hope project that's now a documentary film that you can find on Florida's Coral Reefs website. And it's a great watch, so I'd encourage you to tune in. I'll briefly pause to at least acknowledge the multiple sponsors over the years that have made our work possible before giving you an opportunity to take a photo of our rescue program's handle and my email as well as website, just in case you have any questions that I'm not able to answer after this presentation. At that point, we will continue the presentation with our next presenter.
Born and raised in Michigan, Dr. Derek Burkholder started his work with sharks as a research scientist at Mote Marine Laboratory in the Florida Keys, and quickly expanded his research to include everything from sharks to sea turtles and even seagrass communities during his PhD program at Florida International University, where he focused on top-down control on seagrass communities. At Nova Southeastern University, Derek is fortunate to work as a principal investigator for the Broward County Sea Turtle Conservation Program and a research scientist with the Guy Harvey Research Institute and Save Our Seas Shark Center.
All right, well, thank you all very much for joining today. As Scott said, I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the larger animals. We've got some great background on the coral reefs, sort of at the base of these coastal ecosystems. But moving from there, coral reefs are one of the most diverse and abundant habitats on our planet. And so it's really important to kind of understand how everything works together. And definitely some of these larger critters fall into that as well. So, a lot of the work that I do is really focused around some of these top predators and large grazers like sea turtles and sharks. I'm very fortunate to work at NOVA with a number of different research groups, the Guy Harvey Research Institute and the Save Our Seas Shark Center. And here, we are focusing on sharks and other top, large billfish, sailfish, marlin, things like that. But, one of the reasons that we care about these guys, and especially on our coral reefs, is these are top predators. Many of them are really influential in helping to help balance these coral reef and other marine ecosystems. But unfortunately, as humans, we're pretty good at messing things up, and we've done a good job of doing that with sharks. Many of our populations are extremely severely depleted around the world, some as much as 98%. That's coming largely from, things like the shark fin market. We do use sharks for a lot of things, everything from those fins. We do eat sharks. Oils from their livers go into makeups and lotions. We use their teeth for decorations and, necklaces, things like that. They also get put into some medicine, shark cartilage pills, things like that around the world. So unfortunately, that has a pretty big impact. These guys are all very long-lived, slow-growing animals, But with all these different ways that we use sharks around the world, it's estimated that we're taking over 100 million sharks out of the water every single year. So if you just let that number sink in a little bit, over 100 million sharks every single year that were taken out of the water. And that's having a huge impact on these populations. So a lot of the work that we're doing, and especially the Guy Harvey Research Institute is doing, Dr. Mahmood Shivji is leading this work, and he's using tools called satellite tags to look at the long-term movements of where these guys are going. I know this is going to be kind of a pretty quick overview, but if you guys have any interest, you can go to our tracking website, ghritracking.org, and you can follow a lot of the sharks, things like makos, tiger sharks, oceanic white tips, whale sharks, and even some of the sailfish and marlin, things like that. And what you're going to see on that site is really get an idea. The way these tags work is anytime the fin pops out of the water with the tag on it, it pings the satellite and tells us where that shark is anywhere in the world. So with that, we can plot the long-term movements as these guys are moving around the ocean basin. And so we can really get great information on where they're going, how they're behaving, and trying to figure out ways that we can maybe better conserve and manage these populations as they're moving around. Just to kind of put it in perspective here, you can see on the map, the different colors are different exclusive economic zones of different countries. So the US, Canada, Bermuda, and then all the different Caribbean and Bahamian countries are all going to have their own different exclusive economic zones as well. And what happens is in these different areas, the management is done differently in each of these different countries. And so when we have an animal like this, each one of these dots represents a place where this one mako shark came up to the surface of the water, and we heard from it. So you can see it travel in US waters, international waters, Canadian waters, Bermuda waters, and then obviously the Bahamas as well. And so all these are having different rules, regulations. And so trying to understand how to conserve these animals across such a wide array of, wide distribution is really challenging and something that we struggle a lot with and are trying to work forward in helping manage these kinds of animals. One of the great programs that I'm excited about right here in South Florida is trying to understand what our sharks look like right here in Broward County, South Florida. And so we go out and we've got a program called the Guy Harvey Research Institute Shark Tagging Awareness and Research Program. And this is really dedicated to learning about our sharks, but also educating people in the process. So we can take groups of up to 30 people at a time out with us with our research team. And they're going to get hands-on helping to catch, tag, measure, collect tissue samples, and then obviously release that shark as happy and healthy as we can at the end of the day. But it really gets people involved and, have a personal stake in kind of learning a little bit more about these very, very important animals. The other critters that I want to talk to you about today are sea turtles. And so, as Scott said, I'm involved with the Broward County Sea Turtle Conservation Program, as well as the Marine Environmental Education Center here in South Florida. And so, just to kind of go really briefly into what we do, there are 7 species of sea turtles worldwide. We actually get 5 of those 7 right here in South Florida. The loggerhead, green turtle, and leatherbacks, we get nesting on our beaches. And then offshore, we get Kemp's Ridley and hawksbills on our coral reefs just offshore. So what our program does is we're looking at the nesting and what's going on the beaches as these females come up to lay eggs on the beach. And so a typical day for us, we start about half an hour before sunrise, and we're going to be monitoring about 24 miles of beach of Broward County every single day from March 1st to the end of October. What we're going to do is we're going to drive up and down the sand, right, like I said, right early in the morning, and we're going to look for things like this. This is the crawl of a sea turtle that happened overnight. We can tell by the shape and behavior of the animal what species it is. This particular crawl in this photo is a leatherback sea turtle. And depending on what they're doing, we can tell if they laid a nest, or sometimes we see something like this where the turtle came up, turned around, went right back to the water again without laying a nest. This is something called a false crawl. And maybe the sand wasn't quite right, or maybe there was a tourist running down the beach trying to take its picture as the mom was trying to lay her eggs and scared her back into the water. But for whatever reason, she went off somewhere and will hopefully find a more suitable place later on. In some cases, we will, in any case, we'll respond to any sick, dead, or injured sea turtles. This is a stranded green sea turtle, but we get calls, and I'll give you an emergency line later. We do have a 24-hour, 365-day a year sea turtle emergency line where people can call us up and we'll respond to these animals and get them, any live animals, we'll get to rehab facilities if possible. We may relocate eggs if they're laid in a place that is going to be dangerous for them. In this case, this is a little beach right inside Port Everglades here in Fort Lauderdale. And on the next high tide, you can see how close it is to the water line. The next high tide, that nest is going to be underwater. All those eggs would have been killed and washed back out. And so what we do is we very carefully move those. We're going to take them to a safer spot, put them back in the ground, exactly like the mom did, and give them a better chance of making it to their hatching. In some cases, one of the big stressors we have here in South Florida is lighting. Both the hatchlings and the moms are drawn to the brightest horizon. So unfortunately, that street light or maybe a light on a restaurant or in your home might be pulling sea turtles the wrong direction and actually taking them away from the water rather than getting back to the water like we want them to be. So in some cases, we'll actually install little cages over the egg chamber so that when the babies come up, they'll get stuck in that cage. And we check this throughout the night to be able to get them back into the water rather than having them disorient and go all around the sand during that time. After that, we're going to excavate. After we see a nest hatch, we're going to excavate. What we're doing there is we're collecting data to see how successful the nest was, how many eggs there were, how many of them hatched, didn't hatch. And of course, we're going to usually find a few stragglers that maybe didn't make it out with everybody else. We hold those for the day, and we're going to release them that evening to give everybody as much of a chance as possible to head down the beach. And I'm very happy to say that, we've been actually monitoring the beaches here in Broward County for the last 30 years. And we've had some very exciting seasons the last few years, and we've seen some record high nesting. In 2019, we saw our highest nesting on record in that 30 years with over 3,600 nests. The loggerheads always being the highest number of nests here in Broward County, followed by the green turtles, leatherbacks. In 2020, we saw, again, a solid year. It wasn't a record-setting year, but it was, pretty close to that 2019, another very successful year. And then we just finished our 2021 season, and we had a little over 3,000 nests, but we had a record-shattering year for our leatherbacks. Our previous highest number of nests were 46 nests for Broward County, and we had over 80 this year. So we're very excited to see the last 30 years of all this conservation work coming to fruition and seeing our numbers going up, not only here in Broward County, but across the state. And then the last thing I want to talk about is some of the work of one of my graduate students, Glenn Goodwin. And, like I said, we've been monitoring the turtles here in South Florida the nest here in South Florida for the last 30 years. But we haven't really got an idea of where the moms go when they leave the beach. So we go back to those same satellite tags we looked at before. We wait for the mom to nest as she's moving her way back to the water. In this case, we've got a loggerhead here. We're going to put a little box around it. This is a green sea turtle, and you can see on her back, this is the satellite tag. And again, anytime they come up to the surface, we're going to get a location, figure out where they're going, and we can look at those long-term movements. I'm very excited to say we're starting some work with USGS and doing work in Biscayne Bay, trying to understand where the sea turtles there are going as well. In-water captures look a little bit different than just walking up and putting a box around the sea turtle as it's heading back to the water after nesting. So we do have to catch these guys. In this case, we'll slowly go around till we find a turtle, chase after it, jump off the front of a perfectly good boat, dive down, hopefully grab the turtle, and hopefully get it up to the surface. Obviously, this looks much easier than it can be. These guys are much better suited in the water than we are. But this is definitely the fastest, easiest, less stress on the animal that we can to be able to work with the turtle, get it up, and get it back in the water again. So just like those sharks, we've been tracking sea turtles here in Broward County and Biscayne Bay. And if you go to our turtletracking.org website, you can look at where those guys have been going. Some of our turtles are hanging out right there in the, along the Florida Reef Tract, up into into Florida Bay. We've had some go all the way over to Mexico, down to Cuba, the Bahamas, Caribbean. We've had some even go up to North Carolina. So it's really cool to see where they're going from this, very unique tip of the peninsula here in South Florida. And then the last piece here is, as Scott said, the Marine Environmental Education Center. We're very excited. We've been open since 2017 in Hollywood, Florida. And we've converted a historic home built in 1941 called the Carpenter House into our education center. And so we've been shut down due to COVID and now just due to some construction, but it looks like hopefully in January, we're going to be open back up, and we're very excited to have some new exhibits, including a Florida coral reef tank that has been put together with FAFRA, Kirk Dodson, and some others to be able to show a little bit more about this amazing community and ecosystem we have offshore here. So we're excited to have people back into the center to learn about that. We are located right on the beach in Hollywood. We've converted the old family's beach house into our education center. We do a lot of educational programs, bringing school groups in to learn about sea turtles, sharks, seagrasses, coral reefs, and kind of everything else in between. And we did convert the family's old swimming pool into a habitat. Obviously a little bit more filtration than your normal swimming pool so that we can house Captain, our green sea turtle, who lives on site with us. She was struck by a boat about 11 years ago, was rehabbed, but due to her injuries is never going to be able to be released. So we've got her here at the Marine Environmental Education Center to teach people about these amazing animals and the importance of sea turtles right here in our coastal habitat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for the next one, and I look forward to any questions later on.
Thank you so much, Derek. That was great. And I'd invite anybody here who hasn't been to the Marine Environmental Education Center, MEEC, to go check it out once it's back open. Derek, do you have an idea when it might be open again?
We're hoping January. They're working on the final bits of the construction right now. So we don't have a set date yet, but if you follow our social media pages, we will be making that happen as soon as possible.
Great. We're very
let
excited.
you all know what's going on.
Yeah, we're very excited as Friends of our Florida Reefs to be helping NSU and MEEC and the county to create a coral reef tank that's about 300 gallons, I believe. It's going to look fantastic. It's going to be right next to the pool where Captain the Turtle is swimming around, and it's going to bring great value to the education center with live corals and live fish, indigenous from Florida, so people can understand that with lots of signage around it describing what's going on. It's going to be a wonderful education tool, and we're very excited to be part of that.
I'm pleased to introduce our next expert guest and a dear friend, Megan Kelly of New River Gardens in Fort Lauderdale, who is going to help us understand how it's all connected, roots to reefs, and how we can make a positive difference from our homes with Florida-friendly, low or no nutrient landscaping and gardening. Before we join Megan for her presentation, I want to play a short animated video created by our friends at Miami Waterkeeper, which can help us better understand the dangers of chemical fertilizers, especially with Florida's year-round warm waters and sensitive coasts and reefs.
Mr. Fertilizer is full of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, which is applied to our lawns and yards to help plants grow. However, during the summer months, we get lots of rain, which makes it hard for our plants to absorb Mr. Fertilizer. Instead, Mr. Fertilizer and his nutrients get washed away by stormwater into our storm drains and eventually outfalls that lead to canals, the bay, and to the ocean. In these water bodies, there are tiny plants called algae that love Mr. Fertilizer's nutrients, just like our lawns and plants do. So much so that the algae consume all his nutrients and grow and grow and grow. This can create what we call an algae bloom. Algae blooms are a problem because they clog our waterways, turn the water green, smell bad, can kill fish and wildlife, and can be harmful to people. You can do your part to prevent these blooms by using less fertilizer, not applying it anywhere near drains or waterways, and using it only when we know it isn't going to rain. In fact, you can skip the fertilizer completely during the rainy summer months. Help keep Mr. Fertilizer in our lawns and not our waterways.
A Florida native, Megan Kelly of New River Gardens is a regenerative gardener and whole systems educator specialized in permaculture design, residential edible landscapes, community food forest gardens, and a reunion with our living world. Megan is certified in permaculture design with a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from Loyola University of New Orleans. She has worked and taught on permaculture sites from the tropical jungles of Hawaii to the swamps and bayous of Mississippi, and recently began offering a biannual 12-week permaculture design certificate course in her hometown and county, where she also helps to create and manage communal food forests, including a new edible outdoor exhibit at the world-renowned Museum of Discovery and Science in Fort Lauderdale.
Thank you very much, Scott. Well, I'm not going to be having a PowerPoint, so do you want to just pin my video, Scott, or maybe if you're listening, you can just listen. I'm going to do a little show and tell, change it up a little bit for you guys. It's challenging in these 10 minutes. I can feel all of us just trying to get so much information in 10 minutes. Scott was even like trying to get all that information in then. So just slowing down for a minute, whatever information that sticks out to you from these presentations is meant to stick with you. And I feel lucky to be here with you guys. Grateful to friends of our Florida Reefs, and grateful to Scott, my dear friend as well too. I think of my boss on the Big Island who would say that context is everything. So my context is I grew up here in South Florida, and for the most part, I was very disconnected from the living world, other than my trips to Florida Reefs with my dad. Some of you may know him. He runs another nonprofit called the Dive Bar, and he would take my sisters and I diving on our Florida Reefs. And it was magnificent to be down there with the life and to connect in that way. But for the most part, growing up, like many of us here in South Florida, I grew up to the sound of leaf blowers, weed whackers, and the constant battle to keep the tropics at bay and keep things under control. So I moved back to town about 3 years ago. And I remember one of the first things I did was put on a mask and try and swim out to First Reef. And the lifeguards were upset with me. There's this disconnect even with being able to reach our reefs as well too, but also safety-wise, the boats that move past. But Melissa showed in her presentation, there are so many elements at play in our place that are challenging our reefs. So what I hope to provide you with is just a little blip, a little moment in time of a couple things that you can do from wherever you are right now. So yeah, I think what Scott said about the interconnection of reefs and land is very important. And when you start to make that connection in your head, you start to realize that you can take action. So I know Scott was spinning this as a lunch and learn. So maybe you're eating lunch right now and you have your lunch before you. I saw Xavier on our call earlier. But one of the simple things that we can do is just simply look to the waste stream, look to what we already have around us to get things started. So I have a whole series online on composting that you can look up. I'll share my information at the end, but looking to the waste that we have around us and realizing that waste is just a resource out of place. So by composting in our backyards or looking to our community compost systems that have started up, Xavier is who I mentioned through Live Renewable. I can write that in the chat after. If you're in a condo or you don't feel comfortable composting in your backyard, that is a great option and a great way to start connecting with the living world and having that relationship. And then our other waste is usually plastic waste and things like that. We hear about microplastics in our ocean and things like that. So trying to reduce that through growing food in our own yard, growing medicine in our backyard as well too. So like many of you, I live here in this urban environment where we don't have that much space. And I was hoping to Zoom you from my garden, which is right in front of me. But the lighting wasn't good and the Wi-Fi wasn't cutting it. So I brought in a couple of plants from my garden to show you plants that are allies in our place. So a lot of times we're going to show a short video called Mr. Fertilizer of Miami Waterkeeper. And I know that Scott is going to post that in the chat or post it to you all later. But many of us are using fertilizers, which are a blend of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium synthetically derived and modeled after things that we see in the living world and in nature. So, man, there's so much to get in such a short time. Whatever comes through will come through. So nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, just big words for things that our soil needs to be healthy. And so the soil is the foundation of life in the garden. And I know Melissa was also talking about the microbiome and things like that as well too. So many of us are familiar now with increasing diversity in our guts. So how do we have stronger guts? How do we have stronger immune systems? We do that through increasing bacteria and increasing life and increasing fertility in our bodies. So many times we do that through probiotics and things, and that would be where our compost comes in. But how do we get other things into the soil, specifically nitrogen, which is the #1 missing ingredient in most soil? This is what we're pouring onto our agricultural fields. This is what we're spraying our lawns with, that runs off into our waterways and feeds back into that feedback loop of life. The hydrologic cycle is the perfect example of a feedback loop. Whenever I'm describing what it is that I do or what I teach, I'm often doing this hand gesture, this circular loop of things feeding back into each other. And so when we spray these things in our gardens and on our land and on our crop fields, it feeds back into our waterways and it feeds back into our system, feeds into our corals, specifically for the context of this call. So there are plants that actually can provide this for us, for our gardens. So say you want to grow food, say you want to grow a garden, say you want to increase soil health in your garden, you can grow certain plants like this beautiful sunflower. So this is Mexican sunflower, or Tithonia diversifolia, in bloom right now, blooms throughout the winter season. So beautiful, smells so great. And provides phosphorus to the system. So these plants are called chop and drop plants. So what we do is we grow these fast growing plants, chop them back, and we feed them to the plants in our garden. This is very counterintuitive to our desire to have things be perfect and in control and topiary shaped and mowed all the time. So a lot of it is education and learning how the living world functions through these feedback loops. I see right now the oak leaves falling down all around me from the oak tree that I live beneath. So rather than blowing those leaves up, this is fertility that is naturally being added to the system. So Mexican sunflower, beautiful one that we can grow. Another plant that is blooming right now is pigeon pea, or if you've ever been to a Caribbean restaurant, maybe you've had peas and rice, gandules, gungo peas. So what happens, a lot of these nitrogen fixing plants, so that was our phosphorus, our NPK, that's our P, this is our nitrogen, which is the #1 thing missing from most soil. So if you've tried to grow something and you're like, man, I can't grow, what they want you to do is go to the store and buy some Miracle Grow or something like that. But these nitrogen fixing plants will help to provide nitrogen to the system. Nitrogen is a molecule in the air. These plants perform plant magic where they take that nitrogen, store it in their root nodes, and make it bioavailable to the plants in the soil. So a lot of these nitrogen fixing plants have 3 leaves. This is pigeon pea, which provides protein to our diets as well too. And this pigeon pea, man, I cut it for you guys so you could see, but it's just getting started. So what happens is they bloom, the plant is pollinated, and we get these peas, fixes nitrogen, feeds us protein, delicious. Say we want to have a ground cover, say we don't want to have grass. This is perennial peanut. You may see this sometimes around the city. It has cute little yellow flowers that come out of it that are actually edible. All legumes fix nitrogen as well too. So all beans, all peas, perennial peanut, great ground cover. Another Florida native is mimosa, which has nice pink puffball flowers and is that sensitive plant that closes up, a great ground cover. I am getting close to 1 o'clock and there are so many things to tell you. So that's support species. These are weeds. These are plants that grow well in our place. Maybe this is a plant that you've seen on you before with these little needles that stick to your pants, stick to your pet's legs. This is Spanish needle, a native wildflower that is often demonized and seen as a weed. One of my favorite weeds is popping up probably in your lawn right now. Have you noticed those little white flowers coming up in people's lawns? They call it Florida snow. We all spend all this time and energy decorating our homes for the holidays. We have this wonderful weed showing up in our lawns that we often spray with weed killers. So all this to say it's 1 o'clock and I want to show you guys what I can share with you in case you want to learn more about these sorts of things. So, host disabled participant screen sharing. Scott, I got kicked off earlier, so I might not be a co-host, but I will be teaching another permaculture design certification. So a lot of what I teach is permaculture. This is a made up word for something that humans have been doing for a very long time. Started as permanent agriculture, so more regenerative ways of growing food, but has evolved from there into more permanent ways of being in the world. Primarily, we focus on gardening. We have a whole class on water. And I got screen sharing privileges again. So if you would like to learn more about this, here's a couple of photos of our graduating class this past summer. This is a great way to connect with community, to learn these sorts of skills. And if you sign up and let me know that you're signing up through Friends of Our Florida Reefs, I will be donating 10% of your tuition towards the nonprofit Friends of Our Florida Reefs. But you'll learn all sorts of skills about how we can grow gardens, how we can grow food forests, how we can grow food and medicine right outside our back doors using regenerative practices. So the way you can sign up is, let me share my screen one more time. Here's my little contact info. So I like what, I think it was Dalton. Dalton said, take a photo of it, take a screenshot. My name is Megan. This is my website, New River Gardens. If you're on social media, you can find me on Instagram or on Facebook at these locations. And I would love to connect with you, and I would love to share with you, because for me, the reason I'm here right now is because I love our reefs. There's a lot of reasons that we share around environmentally and economically and all those sorts of things, but I have a feeling that many of you gathered on this Zoom today because you really love our reefs, and all of it is connected, and there are a lot of ways that we can help to improve the system through our own individual actions, and that's why I'm here, to share those resources with you all. So thank you guys, and I will hand it off to Scott for question and answer. Let's do it.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was wonderful. And I invite you guys to check out Megan's website, which is newrivergardens.com, where you can find out everything you want to know about her and more. And also, Megan, I don't know if you're giving a tour of any kind of one of your food forests again. I was just on one last week, but that's a great way to meet her and get an introduction into her world. So if you are doing any of those tours, Megan, please share it with us in the chat. Yeah, at this point, if everybody can stay on for a few minutes, we have a few questions that came up in the chat. And while we still have our guest experts, who I want to thank very much for sticking with us, I like to possibly address them with the experts. We had a great question from one of the founders of, no, sorry, one of the directors of Friends of Our Florida Reefs. His name is Kirk Dotson. I believe he had to leave a little early. And he's actually also the president and founder of the new Reef Discovery Center, which is affectionately considered a spinoff of the Friends Group. It's a long story, I won't bore you with it, but he has purchased a building along the Galt Mile in Fort Lauderdale, which he's converting into an education and research center. And the website for that is reefcenter.org. That's all you have to remember, reefcenter.org. And you can see what's planned for this wonderful spot. It's about 2,500 square feet inside. And early in 2022, the South Florida Association of Environmental Professionals are going to be coming in with the first coral nursery, a raceway tank, we call it. It's a big bathtub, basically. And we're going to harbor salvage corals, salvage Florida corals. These are corals that need to be removed from the reef for one reason or another, possibly from the port, or even the tire reef that's being removed. It's called Osborne Reef, where these old tires are being removed. So we're going to give these corals a home and possibly try to propagate them. And I really invite you to check that out. Unfortunately, Kirk couldn't speak for himself right now, but I'm one of the board directors on that. And we're very excited about that particular project. But Kirk's question for our experts, our reef experts, if I could find it, let me go back and find it, was it's great to do restoration with branching corals, but aren't older corals more important from at least the standpoint of storm surge? So I don't know the answer to that. Who would like to take that question? Possibly Melissa?
I'm going to eventually hand it over to Dalton, because I believe you do some boulder coral restoration, correct? Yeah. So, but I'll just say really quickly that they're all important. Keeping the whole system healthy. I wouldn't give a important value to one species over another on our reef system. All of them together are important. That's my quick answer. Dalton, you want to talk about the restoration?
For sure, you're exactly right. To give you a little bit more context, the history of coral guarding and restoration at first had to focus on threatened coral species because that's where the funding came from, and that's where the problem was most dire. But as we've seen the state of our coral reefs decline further and further, we realized we needed to expand restoration outside of only threatened coral species, and the funding has matched that. And so now, yes, we are focused on many more species, 10 plus species, which is obviously more than just the threatened, through restoration, including massive corals and boulder corals, to try and do ecosystem level restoration, because they all do play a different role. You know, branching corals are fast growing, can provide a lot of habitat in a short amount of time, but massive corals are important framework. And so it's critical that they're also a component of it, because we really do want to ensure that there's not only habitat for marine organisms, but that it's also able to continue serving as that first line of defense for the millions that live on Florida's coastline.
Great, thank you guys. We have another question from Karen Carpenter. I don't know if she's still with us, but her question was a great one, which is good for everybody. How do I volunteer? I am a diver. Well, I can tell you for FOFR, you know, Friends of Our Florida Reefs, Karen, if you're still with us, or anybody listening, if you'd like to volunteer, please send us an email to info@floridareef.org, or just go to our website, look for the contact page, and follow the directions there. Very easy to find us, of course, at our website, which is just floridareef.org. And we've been posting that all around the internet for this particular webinar. And tell us what you're interested in. We definitely always need help with outreach and education. I was just doing an event last night or the other night for Winterfest. It was a very long night, but it could be great with more the merrier. We always love people who are enthusiastic about talking about the reefs, and it's very easy to help us out. As a diver, the Friends group doesn't have a lot going on, but we just a heads up, we might be doing a bio blitz and pier cleanup in spring of 2022. And there'll be more information about that on our website, where divers can actually participate and help clean up Dania Beach Pier. And of course, anybody who's just walking around the beach can help us with that and cleaning up the beach, and also doing a bio blitz, where we write down all the different creatures that we see and elements on the blitz. So, but Dalton, you have a lot for divers. So what can you tell us?
Yeah, we certainly try. You know, our rescue reef program is just an extension of our coral research lab at the University of Miami. So that means we have a small team, but we still aim to host 10 to 20 of the citizen science public expeditions per year, where our goal is to get as many new different people on board as possible. So we'd love to have anyone interested join us. And you can find more info on what those expeditions look like on our website. You can just Google Rescue a Reef and it'll pop up. And then there's an email list, which is really the best way to stay up to date, because when we have new expeditions for citizen scientists, we send it to our email list first, so they have the first opportunity to sign up. So that would be my recommendation. But there's other groups like the Coral Restoration Foundation, which has opportunities for citizen science divers. There's like we'd mentioned earlier, CFAN is a citizen science program. Reef is a diving citizen science program. And then Debris Free Oceans does marine debris removal as well for citizen science divers. So there's a lot of cool things you can do year round.
Yeah, and actually I should mention, we had to take a break in 2020 and 2021, which is our Bleach Watch citizen science program that we work with the DEP and CFAN, which is where we help train you to become a very perceptive diver who can recognize bleaching and disease, which are not the same thing, but they can look similar, and report that back to CFAN, especially with pictures. You know, everybody takes a camera down on their dives these days, and that's very helpful with GPS location. So that's all you really have to do, is try to take a picture, good picture, and know what location you are or what reef, and you can send that information back to CFAN. You don't really need that much training. If you just see something that doesn't look right out in the ocean, especially as a diver, like a dying coral head, or something that dying fish, or even something on the surface, please report that to cfan.net, and you can find that information also at floridareef.org, our website. And we do look forward to rebooting the Bleach Watch training program, which is where we not only give you a class, but we could possibly take you out on a dive with expert divers who know what to point out for you down underneath the water for bleaching and disease. So keep an eye out for that. Derek, do you have anything for volunteers at this time?
As far as volunteers, when we get open back up, we do have some volunteer opportunities, not in the water, but to help at the Marine Environmental Education Center. And then we do, if people are interested in getting involved, we do obviously have that shark tagging program where people can bring, whether you're a school teacher or if you have a group that are interested in coming out and learning and participating in a day, we can get that scheduled up. Or we do also have ride-along programs for our sea turtle program, as well as hatchling releases in July and August each year for those interested in seeing some of the hatchlings head out to the water.
Yeah, that's great. And we did have a question for you, Derek. I think I know the answer, but are there any seahorses at Meek?
They're not at this time. As I said before, we've got this coral reef tank coming online. That's going to be the first of 3 tanks. We're also going to have a mangrove tank and a seagrass tank. So there might be some opportunities down the line to maybe get some seahorses in there, but we don't have anything at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to segue to Megan because I have a question for you from the audience, Megan. But also, Megan, do you have any volunteer opportunities beyond your class, which is more of a class participation, but do you think there'll be anything in 2022 coming up?
Yes, absolutely. I wrote in the chat that we'll be at the Monarch Food Forest this Thursday, getting the outdoor classroom space ready. And if you'd like to go for a tour, you're welcome to do so. Many of our community gardens are just open to the public. Some of them have gates, but I would definitely recommend just reaching out to me through the website if you're interested in getting involved. There are a lot of these hidden gems throughout the city that I hope will not be hidden anymore. So you can connect with these places because they're truly living plant libraries. Like if you were interested in this sunflower, it grows super easily from cutting. So you can take a cutting, stick it in your yard and grow it. Take some pigeon peas, plant them in your garden. So I would recommend definitely reaching out to the website and you will get connected in that way.
That's newrivergardens.com. Yes.
Correct. I will write it in the chat. Okay,
fantastic. And this question is for you, Megan, from Melanie Braun in our audience. Thank you, Melanie. Can you please provide a link which plants to grow and what time of the year to self-fertilize? So if there's something you want to say verbally about it or possibly in the chat box.
Yes, I can send something in the chat box. I don't have an extensive list. We have something that I can send you a list if you reach out to me by email of plants that do well in our place. Another thing I didn't mention is just growing plants that want to grow well. Like this is Cuban oregano. So rather than growing the traditional oregano, we can grow this tropical oregano that does well in our place. But I can provide you with that list, and the course would definitely provide you with more information on that. But I don't think that I have some sort of video online for support species and mineral accumulators. But if you join the course or you hang out with us, you will definitely get to know a lot of those plants. So just reach out and we can fill you in on that.
Sounds like something we can work on sometime with the video. This John Weitzman asks, can you post the website and email address in the chat? John, I think we are doing that in the chat, but also if you come to the Ocean Day page, the landing page where you registered, every person who is presenting today, I provided a link to their primary website. So, and we'll also provide more information in our post-production of this event. So I believe everything is there, and special guests, if you can, just make sure your website, your best place to go to is in the chat box for our visitors here. And I want to let everybody know this particular Ocean Day webinar that's running a little over, I appreciate your time, was actually over 3 hours this time last year that we produced, where we did one just on coral reefs, one on marine wildlife, and one on Florida-friendly landscaping and gardening. Each one was at least 1 hour. So we were trying to do a speed version of it because who has 3 hours? And we hope this is like kind of a reintroduction to these particular topics. And we invite you to come to our Ocean Day page, which you could easily find at the FOPR website, floridareef.org, where we have a resource page at the bottom of the registration page, and I'll make it more evident, where you can find all these webinars that we recorded just this time last year in their long form. So if you're really fascinated by what you heard today and you want to read more or see more, please watch these webinars. They aren't very dated at all. And we would really appreciate it if you can give them some clicks and some love. We recorded them last year and they're on the internet for YouTube for all prosperity and for the whole world to see, but hopefully you guys especially. I want to thank all our special guests, Melissa Sahi, Derek Burkholder, Dalton Hesley, and Megan Kelly. My name is Scott Scheckman, and I want to thank you all for your wonderful time and expertise. Couldn't do it without you. And for our lovely audience, thank you for being a wonderful audience, not making any noise, keeping yourself muted, a perfect audience for us. And please check us out on the Ocean Day website where we'll try to keep all this fresh. We also have our Facebook page where we try to keep all the information fresh. And if you have any questions at all for our presenters and it's afterwards, please send it to info@floridareef.org and we'll do our best to forward it to them if you can't find them yourself.